Hello, everybody. I'm Steve. This is Kunal. Today, what we wanted to do is share with you an experience that we've had at DocuSign in terms of scaling our Agile practices. And we've done things pretty much our own way. We've done things the DocuSign way. And so when I say basically in an unsafe world, it's basically not in a scaled Agile framework for the enterprise type of world that we have. We do some elements of that, but we are not trying to become safe compliant by any stretch of the imagination. So what we hope to do is share with you today some of the best practices that we have had, that we've done, some things that maybe you in your practice would like to do or compare to what we do, and maybe at the end of that could be a good takeaway. All right, so let me give you a little bit of background. 300 of them are in the engineering and technical operations group. So when we talk about scaling, we're talking about scaling in this part of the organization, working through that. So let me start first about where DocuSign began on its Agile journey. I'll go quickly through this because it's very similar probably to what many of you have done. But we started pretty recently. We've done Agile on and off for a few teams, but in 2014 was when we really got serious about Agile, and we brought in a consulting company to teach our teams basically a little bit about Scrum, how does Scrum work, and we rolled out Scrum across the entire organization. So that was what we started with, basically at the team level, mostly in San Francisco and Seattle. In 2015, we started to expand a little bit on that. With 30 teams, it became obvious that we needed some way to be able to coordinate across these teams, especially when it came to managing dependencies and duplicating of effort and that sort of thing. So we focused on how do we do that, and we settled on more of a centralized planning model. We also started to use a bit of the Spotify framework. I don't know if you're familiar with Spotify, but it's an interesting way to handle large development organizations in a matrixed environment. So we started using bits and pieces of that as well, mostly in terms of what we call missions and basically teams. The other things that we've focused on early on with our teams was basically getting them on a consistent cadence. We found that if we could get the teams working together, ending their sprints at the same time, releasing software at the same time, it started to really coalesce the whole development process. It made coordination easier. It made the headaches of release management a little bit easier, and so on. And then that brings us to 2016. Basically, we are focusing this year on increasing our transparency, understanding a little bit about what our capacity is. So we have, like I said, 300 people in our engineering group, and understanding how to allocate those folks to the right parts of the backlog or the right parts of the product so that we're getting the biggest bang for the buck is a bit of a challenge, which is where we started to really start to see some of the issues with scaling and some of the need for being able to add more process. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the top-down part of our planning process today, and then when I get to the point where we're done with the top-down part of it, I'm going to talk also about the bottom-up. I'm going to hand off the bottom-up planning to Kunal, because we do a little bit of both. We set the stage with the top-down picture, which comes from management and the leadership team. Once that's in place and we have that vision, then we give it to the teams to figure out, okay, can we really do this? And then the teams come back and say, usually, we can do about this much of what you're looking for. So now go back and rejigger your plans. We'll explain how we do that. So, like I mentioned, we have 30 plus geographically dispersed teams. Getting them to talk together is one of the things that we're really trying to figure out. We have multiple release trains, like we mentioned before. And then the thing that's striking us right now is being able to respond to the changing business climate and be able to change direction for these teams basically at any point during the release cycle, not just at the quarterly planning sync points, but any time. And then dependencies and common nomenclature. So I mentioned a little bit about being unsafe. I wanted to point some things out about scaled Agile for the enterprise. It's a good framework, but from our perspective, we kind of perceive the framework to be a little bit heavy. There's a lot to it, and most of it we feel like it doesn't apply to us so much. What we want to focus on is what are the teams doing, keep as much flexibility and agility at the team level as we possibly can, and we felt like if we layered on too much of what Scaled Agile for the enterprise is offering, it would be killing some of the innovation at the team level. So really we're focused on not everything in the framework, but mostly at the team level and the release train level. So scaling to serve agile growth, that's really what this is all about today. And I promise there won't be too many more slides like this. We'll show you real examples here in a minute. But the thing about scaling for us, we know that we need to stay focused on agile principles, and it's easy to lose sight of that as you begin to layer in some of the mechanisms and the ceremonies. And then teams start to lose sight of the fact that still it's, interactions and people over process and tools, and that starts to go away because this scaling of your enterprise really does involve a lot of process and tools. And so you can easily lose sight of the fact that, it's really about the people, it's about your teams, it's about what can they accomplish, not what can we measure necessarily. So that's very important for us to keep in mind. Synchronizing organizational cadence is important. Top-down planning I talked about, and the bottom-up planning and execution. These things are what we're focused on today. At the end of today's talk, I will also talk about where we're going next and how we're going to evolve the organization to go from where we're at today. But for this talk, what we wanted to share specifically are some of the processes that we do on a top-down perspective. And when I say top-down, I mean product management is going to take and run with the priorities of what we're going to be developing. Our leadership team will vet that with the product management group. We'll come up with a high-level plan. So what that looks like is we have mission-based roadmaps. We start there. This is usually a horizon of anywhere from 12 to 18 months. Once we have that kind of settled in, we meet with our counterparts in the sales and marketing group to make sure that from their perspective and what they're trying to do, we're in line with where product is going, and we make adjustments on both sides if we need to. Then we get into the product priorities. These are the very specific nuts and bolts of the things that we're going to be achieving. This horizon is typically 3 to 6 months. Very rarely does it go beyond 3 months. It's mostly a list of things that are going to be what the teams are going to focus on, and so we need to vet those and prioritize those, and then when we give that to the teams, that's when they come back and tell us really what can we do. But before we do that, we have to understand how much capacity do we have to devote against that backlog. So when we consider the fact that we have 30 teams, those teams range in size from 3 people to 12 people, depending upon what they're focused on. And that might not be allocated exactly the way we want to from a portfolio perspective in terms of where we want to invest those resources. So we take a good hard look at that model in terms of where we're at against the priorities, and then we make some adjustments there. So here's our timeline, and this is going to look a little waterfallish, but it's really just to kind of give you an idea what the milestones are that drive our planning process from the top down from what I'm talking about. So about 40 days before we start development, before we even cut any code, this is where the product management team is saying, okay, based on that roadmap, based on my mission, I have a list of features that I want to put into next quarter's delivery cycle, and I want my development teams to work on these things. Well, that list is good and fine, but with the fact that we have 30 other product managers potentially going after those same resources, we ask that they go ahead and put together a list from the standpoint of thinking about it as if they were going to pitch that to like a VC, for example. And we want them to explain why this is important to the business and justify the fact that they need resources to work on this. When we go through that process, it's a bit of a Shark Tank process. When we go through that process at the end of it, the leadership team And our head of product will decide, okay, these are the features I think based on what I'm seeing here and based on what the vision is for our company that we're going to focus on in the quarter, and then take some of the other features off the list. So it's an important process, and it's one that is very fun to watch because it's interesting to see how the product manager pitches their product. And if they're good at pitching the product, quite often sometimes that's good enough for them to get their feature up at the top of the list. So sometime between the 40 and 30-day mark before we start development, we start to narrow down the scope of those features that have been selected. And then we look at those in relationship to the capacity that we just talked about, and then we start to say, okay, we think we can get these things done in the quarter. Again, this is a top-down view. We haven't engaged the teams yet. We've only engaged the team and engineering leaders. We have a concept called 3 in the box. This is where product management, engineering leadership, and user experience leadership get together and take a look at the list, and they start to size it, asking some questions about what are we trying to, how are we trying to resolve these requirements. So at this stage, we have a sense of where we want to go and what we want to do. We have a list of release items basically that we're considering. So between the 30 and the 7 days before we start, that's when we give the list to the teams. The teams now have a crack at, okay, this is what we're talking about doing. This is what I'm going to be working on for the next 3 months. And they need to look at that and vet out the requirements a little bit more clearly, and Kunal will explain how we do that, and then size it. They're going to estimate it. These are where the epics and stories come in. We try not to go too much below epics at this stage. We really want to keep it high level. So the teams are still going to t-shirt size, but they're going to make more or less a commitment on their release plans at this point. And when I say commitment, this is the team's best effort for where they think they can get to at the end of the delivery cycle. So 7 days before, we take a look at that list before we start development, and we bring that again to our executive team and our head of product, and we say, okay, it looks like based on what the teams are telling us, we could do this much here, but not as much as we thought over here. And they can commit to this, but they think they can't commit to that. What do you think? And our leadership team will go through that, and then they'll make some last-minute adjustments based on that knowledge. And then once we have a plan at this stage, we have something that the leadership team can take to the executive staff and the rest of the organization in terms of, okay, here's what our plan looks like. It looks pretty solid. And the teams have a pretty good feel for what they think they can do. So here's an example of the feature roast slide. This is the first thing I talked about in the T minus 40. It's very simple, really, and what we're asking our product manager to do is fill this in and explain pretty much how, what is it that they're trying to do. They're not really explaining how it's going to get done. We're not interested in, at this stage, anything more than what is the feature and what's the business requirement. So we go through a whole deck of this. This meeting can be anywhere from 2 hours to 6 hours, depending upon how much we want to go through on that particular day. We don't go through every single feature that we're going to do, but we go through the features that are most important, or the features that are least understood, or the most controversial. This document, we do a lot of spreadsheet stuff to prepare all of the features. This document is what we use to catalog everything that all the product managers want to do for the given quarter. Right now it's a Google Doc sheet, but it gives us an idea of what release train we're targeting. We put a JIRA ticket for the epics if you want to drill down and find out a little bit more detail. And then we do basically a stack rank priority. This sheet pretty much drives everything at this stage of the game from now all the way until the end of delivery. And then we use this sheet to do our metrics to see how we've performed against what we thought we would do. And then here's a quick sheet at our capacity model. So we ask the engineering leaders to put this together when we do our capacity planning. It's pretty straightforward. I'm sure it's something very similar to what most of you are doing in terms of looking at your team structures. So we get the engineering team together separately from the product team, and then we talk about, okay, here's the list, here's who we have, do we think we can do it with these people, do we need to hire people, or do we need to shift people around based on this information. So we do one of these per team. So we'll have 30 slides, we'll go through this in about an hour or two. Okay, at this stage, pretty much our top-down planning is done, and it's time to get into a little more detail around our bottom-up planning. So what I'd like to do is turn this over to Kunal at this stage. He'll take us through that and our execution process.
Nice job, Steve.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kunal Arora. I'm a program manager at DocuSign, and I'm here to talk about our Agile journey and how Atlassian products helped us improve our quarterly delivery rate. But first, let's get started with bottom-up planning. So as Steve just mentioned, in our quarterly planning process, we have product managers doing a feature roast, where we have sort of vetted out the priorities within our organization, and bottom-up planning fits in where we're just about to start development. One of the first ceremonies that takes place within bottom-up planning within our organization is a UX roast, where our design team gets an opportunity to present the final designs for the features that have been agreed upon by the leadership team. This is an opportunity for anyone to provide their final feedback before we actually start development in order to avoid rework. Once we sort of accomplish UX roast, we further engage our IT, legal, and security teams to notify them of the features that are coming. As an enterprise organization, we need to satisfy the internal business requirements and make everyone aware of what's coming so we can include any concerns they might have and address them before the features are actually launched to customers. And the last key activity that takes place within bottom-up planning is a quarterly planning session. This is a 2-day planning session where all of the product engineering teams meet. We evaluate the ask from product management, and the teams commit to a sprint-by-sprint plan that's presented to our leadership team at the end of day 1, allowing them to make any adjustments as they see fit at the end of day 1. So day 2 is focused around addressing those concerns and presenting a final plan to our leadership team so we all understand what we're going to be delivering at the end of the quarter. This is what's happening today. 2 years ago, things were a lot different. 2 years ago, our quarterly delivery rate was 53%. And by quarterly delivery rate, I mean things that we committed to delivering in the beginning of the quarter versus what we actually delivered at the end of the quarter. This is an F on a report card. We knew something was wrong, and we started exploring various tools and processes and honed in on scaled Agile. Here's a picture of our first quarterly planning session. Looks like fun, and it was. We co-located all of the team members within our product engineering team in San Francisco, took over a conference room for 10 hours, and this is what we ended up with. What we're looking at here is 6 poster boards that represented 2-week sprints that we wanted to target for that particular quarter. The orange Post-its all the way on the left represented the teams that we identified to accomplish the mission. And all of the Post-its in the middle represented the features that the teams felt they could deliver on a sprint-by-sprint basis. And we identified dependencies between teams by using a red thread. At the end of this first session, our leadership thought this was a really useful exercise, and we implemented processes to do this at the beginning of each quarter. Now, we use various tools within our organization to deliver all the features that are being requested by our customers. And one of the tools that we're using today to scale this process is Lucidchart. Lucidchart allows all of our co-located team members to collaborate quickly and create a sprint-by-sprint plan that's presented at the end of day 1 of our quarterly planning session. In addition to Lucidchart, we do use a handful of other tools. And I'm very happy to report, after 2 years of having implemented scaled Agile, our last quarter delivery rate was 86%. Thanks to all the different processes that we've shared with you today, So let's talk about execution. So far, we've talked about what the teams have committed to delivering at the end of each sprint. So how do we ensure that we're actually delivering the plan? We start off having 3 key meetings. First one is a Scrum of Scrums. It's a weekly leadership call where we highlight current status and any risks that we're seeing that will hold us back from delivering our commitments at the end of the quarter. Next year is Product Council. So if there are any open items that we weren't able to resolve within Scrum of Scrums, we take that to Product Council where our leadership team makes hard decisions. Decisions around resource allocations, budget constraints, things of that nature within a small group are discussed. We make the decisions and further communicate those decisions to the teams. And on a weekly basis, the program team is meeting, highlighting their current statuses of their programs and dependencies between each other. These are reporting channels that we currently have placed within our organization to highlight risk, to get the teams back on track as we deliver our features. Let's give you a look into how we're currently using Confluence to set up our pages for reporting purposes in Scrum of Scrums. So at any given quarter, we can have up to 150 initiatives that are currently in flight to be delivered. And one of the key things that work for us is a checkbox. There's a checkbox next to the status here that's checked off for team members to discuss any items that they want to discuss with the leadership team during Scrum of Scrums. This is a 30-minute discussion. We want to quickly go through and report current status to our organization. And using a checkbox really helps identify the things that are of importance to be discussed. Here's an example of how our release management team is using Confluence to keep track of our releases. There's a release epic that can be clicked upon that will expand all the changes that we're making in a particular release. So in case there was ever an audit, we have a clear way of justifying the changes that we made. I think we showed you guys plenty of slides today, so let's switch it up. I'm actually going to do a demo of a really cool integration that we have built between DocuSign, HipChat, and JIRA. I want to thank Travis. Sure. The anticipation. You guys good? No? Still can't hear me? All right. So I want to ask. So we're going to do I don't know if you guys got what I said about the demo, but we have a really cool integration that we've built within DocuSign, HipChat, and JIRA. I want to give a shout out to Travis Gorg and our release team. He's sitting right here. So if you guys have any questions about this integration, please feel free to reach out to him after the talk. Let's get started. This is going to be fun. So if you guys use DocuSign, this is what a DocuSign account looks like. This is an internal tool that we've built. So we've actually created a template for our release authorization form because this is a practice that happens quite so often. Within this template, we've identified a handful of things that are required. We've created a workflow. So we have, for this particular demo, we have 3 signers. And as a submitter, I am the first signer that needs to sign this document in order to move it forward. So we'll go ahead and submit this document. And these are the steps that we take to sort of execute our release authorization form. So we'll go ahead and hit send. And as the first signer, I get a modal to actually sign this document. But wait, let me show you the window here on the left. This is the integration that we've built within HipChat. So I've just kicked off a release authorization form, and everyone in the HipChat room has been notified of the current status of the release. And at the same time, with our integration, we've created a JIRA instance that reflects the same information in terms of summary and status. This is a quick way of keeping all of the team members notified of what the current status is. So I'll go ahead and sign this document. And if you haven't used DocuSign, this is what the experience looks like. You receive a document that requires your signature. The form loads. In this particular case, the fields that are highlighted in red are required. We're building really awesome features for our customers, and we want to get these released. There are a few required authorizations within this workflow that we have created, including QA and operation engineers. So I'll go ahead and hit finish. And what's happening here is my electronic signature is being applied to this document. And this envelope will get routed to the next signer that needs to approve this request. Go ahead and open up the document to show you. QA signer is the next person that needs to sign this document. And over on the left, there's an update in the HipChat room. And we've sort of moved from open to ready for approval state. That's the workflow that we had created for the purposes of this demo. Now, I've actually gone ahead and signed the next two signatures that were required. So you're seeing in testing and close. And if you look at JIRA, we'll update that status, and you'll saw that update from in testing to close to match the same status. Looking at the document here, you can see all of the required signatures have been obtained. There's a JIRA link that's been added to the document. And scrolling through this document, you can see all of the comments that were left in HipChat that match the updates that were reflected in the chat room itself. So not only do we just use our own product to obtain release authorization, we have a secure, compliant, and 100% auditable process in place to do release authorization. And that's DocuSign. So let's talk about our quarterly release process, given you guys just became familiar with our authorization process. So 60 days before we actually release to production, we engage our product marketing teams to identify opportunities for the features. 15 days before production, we're actually doing a deployment to demo, where we're doing joint testing with our customers. Meet Kelly. She's an important team member in our product marketing team, and she helps us organize demo days. So right before we're getting ready to launch features to production, we have a ceremony called Demo Day, where the product management team gets an opportunity to present the final features so we can be better ready as an organization to answer any questions from our customers. And this is Casey. She doesn't smile like this every day. Definitely not on days when we have release blockers. But I guarantee you, she's smiling when we do release to production. So we release to production, we publish our final release notes, and notify our customers of all the enhancements that are available within our product. So we've shared a lot of information with you today. In case you're wondering what's working well, because of all the processes that we currently have in place, we have cross-organization planning that's happening because these activities that we've just shared with you are happening on a regular cadence. There's a better understanding of our current processes and priorities, so we don't get any questions around why are we working on this feature or why is this important. Teams feel committed to the plans that they have agreed upon of delivering at the end of the quarter. And last but not least, we're using metrics to track our progress. And with that, I'll turn it over to Steve, and he's going to talk about next steps and how we plan to evolve.
Thanks, Kunal. Thank you, Kunal. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. So I'm going to wrap this up real quick and explain how we're going to go to the next step. And so we have the classic evolution picture here. I had a Pokemon evolution, but they told me to take that off and put this on instead. So sorry for those of you who are into Pokemon Go. We have to do this. So we're going to be looking to do a couple of things. We're going to implement Portfolio for JIRA, especially the latest version, which offers quite a lot of functionality for us to maybe even replace some of the spreadsheets that we showed you earlier. Spreadsheets are still probably going to be a big part of the very early top-down process, but when it comes to vetting the final plan and putting together a release plan that we think we can really buy into and then execute on, Portfolio for JIRA really is the place for us to be. It's the place where teams are working, so it's the one thing that we think is the most important thing to get into next. Metrics and information radiators are a big deal for us as well. We're kind of flying blind, to be quite honest with you, at the moment. So when we start execution today, and we get into the Scrum of Scrums, and if you remember back to the slide that Kunal showed you earlier, it's a nice picture. It has a lot of information on it, but it will only tell you red, yellow, green in progress, or not started, or finished and shipped. But it doesn't really tell you much of what's happening in between. For us, our next step really is, we need to know what's happening in between, because we don't want to go month after month with an in progress, and then all of a sudden it turns yellow and then red. Then we have a mission-centric Scrum of Scrums. So we're going to the point where one Scrum of Scrums really doesn't cut it for us. We need a mechanism in place to focus teams on really what is their core mission, and really bring those teams into a Scrum of Scrums, and then kind of federate those up to a higher level. And then do a thing which we call Product Council, where we take all of the items that bubble up from the different Scrum of Scrums, bring it into the executive staff, and we can remove blockers and deal with those things there. And then architecture runway. We have an architecture runway. It's very solid, but it isn't very highly transparent for us. So that's something we need to get into JIRA and then add in with all of the other things that we're doing as well. So we provide visibility into every piece of work that the team is doing, not just the product development work. So that pretty much brings us to where we're going next. And with this, we believe, quite honestly, we're going to hit 90% with our delivery rate. We think that this is very important to get to this point. And I should caveat this 90%. What I want to point out is that, we don't care if a team tells us we're going to do these 10 things and commit to them and then measure them against those 10 things. We just care if a team can do 10 things and are they able to deliver 10 things. We don't care which 10 things they are, to be quite honest with you. So I want to know, yes, you're committing to this group, but if something falls out, what's replacing it? And is that an equal thing? So we're going to get to a point with these numbers where we can start to measure that as well. So we're going to use business value indexes, and we're going to do basically team sizing from an Epic standpoint, using story points instead of t-shirt sizes. Other things that we're doing, basically, one of the things, before I end this, this is our last slide today. One of the things I'd like you to kind of take away from this is the fact that Agile is just a framework. It's not a methodology, and I think a lot of you are pretty aware of that. And we drive that home to our teams every day. We want them to know that basically this is their process. They need to improve this process. They need to stay agile, and Agile is the core of everything that we do. And that's all the way up through the top-down planning, and again, back down into the bottom-up planning. So keeping teams in control, that's just a key tenet or key principle for what we're trying to do here. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
See if this works. Thank you, Steve and Kunal. It looks like we have time for just 1 or 2 questions, if you want to stick around. If you haven't already submitted your question through the app or upvoted what you like, please take a moment to do that now. And we'll just get started. So the first question is how did you normalize story points across teams?
Actually, we didn't normalize story points. One of the things about the Scaled Agile framework, for the enterprise is that normalized story points are very important, especially for the metrics and measuring and comparing teams. We feel at DocuSign that normalizing story points is one of the things that takes away some of the element of control at the team level. So we actually don't normalize story points.
The next question is, do you end up with 3 months worth of sprints planned by the end of your quarterly planning sessions?
Yes, we do. Most teams are at that point. Some teams do not have enough information to fill out a full 3 months worth of backlog. So we work with those teams, but for the most part, our teams do have a full 3 months set of sprints.
Awesome, and we'll do one more question. What's the difference between Scrum of Scrums and program review?
So Scrum of Scrums is actually a leadership call where we have our head of product, VP of engineering present, and also our UX leads, right? This is a reporting channel. With program reviews, it's mainly just the program team. So we're giving updates between the program management team in terms of how we're doing within our programs and highlighting things that we want to bring up to our leadership team during Scrum of Scrums.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve and Kunal. I think they'll be around for if you want to come up and ask them a few more questions.